Intermittent fasting. How many carbs a day do you need to survive? We hear all the time how important carbohydrates are, how you'll get energy from carbohydrates, how your brain can't function without the glucose from carbohydrates. But if that is true, then how much do we actually have to have, and where do they come from when we're fasting? Today we're going to dispel the myths, we're going to give you the facts, and before we're done you're going to understand exactly how it works, so that next time that someone tries to tell you that your brain will run out of fuel if you go on a fast, then you can relax because you know exactly how it works. Coming right up. Hi, I'm Dr. Ekberg. I'm a holistic doctor and a former Olympic decathlete. And if you want to truly master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss anything. While all of the data that I'm going to share with you is documented and very easily verified, a lot of the conclusions and a lot of the correlations that I'm sharing, I have never seen in print or in video anywhere else. So I believe this is the first time that these correlations have been presented this way. Lots of people know that glucose is a necessary fuel for the brain. So people are wondering, where do we get it when we're fasting? Because we're not taking in any glucose. And when we run out of glycogen stores, we can still fast. So how does that work? When I set out to do this video and I did some research, I had some ideas of what I thought I would find, but I was absolutely blown away. I was awestruck by how brilliant, how elegant everything about our bodies, everything about our physiology is designed. And I know I can be a little bit of a geek, but if you're even half the geek I am, I think that you'll be blown away as well. So I think you'll like this one. First, I want to dispel some myths, because we've been told that carbs are the preferred fuel. So many places you look online, they say, oh, well, of course, carbs are a preferred fuel. And it's just something that's been repeated so many times that a lot of people just think that's how it is. But the fact is, the truth is that your body is amazingly well adapted at using whatever fuel you give it. Okay? It's good with some variety over time, because only fat or only protein or only carbohydrate only works so long. So it's good to know how to mix it up a bit. But to say that we have to have carbohydrate, it's just plain wrong. Our ancestors probably had some carbohydrate in the summer during growing season, but they were probably without carbohydrate almost entirely, or mostly without carbohydrate for long periods of the year. So it's not a preferred fuel, it is a fuel. The reason some people think it's preferred is that the body will burn it first. And why is that? And it won't necessarily burn it first, it will just take care of it first, because blood sugar is toxic to the brain. That's why diabetics get these devastating side effects. They get blindness, they get kidney failure, they get neuropathy with amputations, because really high blood sugar destroys tissue. So it's essential for the body to bring it down. That's why it handles it first, but it doesn't mean it's a preferred fuel. And we'll talk about what happens to it, that it doesn't actually burn it, it just takes care of it. It converts it first into glycogen and then to fat. Myth number 2, carbs are essential. We're told that because the brain has to have them, they're essential. Because they provide energy, they're essential. So essential is something that you cannot live without. It is something that your body cannot manufacture, and if you don't add it into your diet, then you will die. 2 examples are essential amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins, and if you don't add them in your diet on a regular basis, you will die. That's what essential means. And there are essential amino acids. There are essential fatty acids, such as linoleic acid and linolenic acid. Your body can't make them, so they have to be added in the diet. You die without them. That's what essential means. But there are no essential carbohydrates. And if I have missed something, I urge you to send me the link, send me the information, and tell me which the essential carbohydrates are. I would just love to know. Myth number 3, the brain can only use glucose for fuel. So it is true that glucose is necessary for the brain. It is true that the brain is more limited in which fuels it can use because of something called the blood-brain barrier. Proteins and long fatty acids can't make it across, so the brain is more limited. But it is not true that glucose is the only fuel. When carbs are in limited supply and when the body becomes fat adapted, then a byproduct of fat metabolism is called ketones. So when we're in ketosis from a ketogenic diet, or when we are fasting, so we're eating no carbohydrates, then we'll burn more fat, we'll become fat adapted. And as much as 75% of the fuel, of the energy of the brain, is derived from ketones. So yes, glucose is necessary for the brain, but it can do really, really well on a mix of about 25% glucose and 75% ketones. And as a matter of fact, lots of research are showing that the brain behaves and performs a whole lot better with a mix of ketones and glucose than on glucose alone. So that was just clearing up a few myths, and you can verify those anywhere online. It is straight out of textbooks of physiology from Wikipedia. There is no discussion, there is no confusion on those. Now, how much carbohydrate does the brain need? We said it has to have some. The brain uses 20% of all your calories. It's a very, very active organ. It's only 2% of your body weight, but it uses 20% of your calories. So let's assume round numbers that you're using 2,000 calories a day for your whole body. 20% of that would be 400 calories of energy that your brain needs every day. And then we know that only 25% of that has to be glucose, which makes the daily requirements 100 calories, and 1 gram of glucose is 4 calories. So when we divide that out, it becomes 25 grams. So that is the number. When people tell you that we have to have carbohydrates, that is true because the brain needs about 25 grams of carbohydrate. What's not true is that you have to add them in the diet and that you need them on a regular basis. You must have eaten food at some point in your life that the body could convert to carbohydrates or were carbohydrates, but you do not, once you have a body, you do not need to add them on a regular basis. And we're going to explain exactly why and how that works. Just to clarify, because someone's going to bring this up, there is one other tissue that can only use glucose, and that's red blood cells. They don't have a nucleus, they don't have the mitochondria that can use oxygen. So the only fuel source for red blood cells is to take a glucose molecule and split it down the middle in something called glycolysis, which means to break glucose. And in the process, they get a little bit of energy and they produce lactic acid. The beauty of that, though, is that the lactic acid can be recycled. So the red blood cells aren't actually using up any precious resources. They're just redistributing a little bit because the liver can turn this right back into glucose, because the liver can utilize oxygen and it can sort of use that oxygen on behalf of the red blood cells and convert that lactic acid back. And the liver makes the glucose. So these 25 grams are going to come from the process called gluconeogenesis. When we don't eat carbohydrates, when we don't add them from the outside on a daily basis, such as a longer fast, then gluconeogenesis, meaning making glucose from scratch, making glucose from something that wasn't glucose. And it's possible to do that from amino acids and from lactic acid, also known as lactate, and from something called glycerol. So these are the main components that exist in the body that when we don't eat carbs, the body can turn them into glucose so that we can we can manufacture those 25 grams. First, we have to look at where they came from in the first place, because we said that they exist in the body when we're fasting in some shape or form. So we had to eat them at some point, and I'm going to use carbohydrates because they're the ones who raise blood sugar. Carbohydrates get broken down in your digestive tract, they get absorbed into the bloodstream, they become blood glucose. Insulin is the hormone that opens the door into the cell and guides the glucose into the cell. Now the cell has three choices. The cell can use this glucose. It can oxidize the glucose with oxygen, use oxygen and the mitochondria to turn it into energy. And on average, if you're at rest or at very low activity, you will be using about 80 to 100 calories per hour. Anything more that you ate that gets into the bloodstream is going to have to be stored. And it will be stored either as glycogen or as fat. If you eat a meal of 1,000 calories and there's a lot of carbs in there, then that meal is going to pass through the bloodstream, the blood glucose, in the next couple of hours. So at the end of those 2 hours, you will have used 160 to 200 calories. The other 800 or so calories have to be stored. And you can store it in the form of glycogen. So glycogen is a storage form. The muscles and the liver can put away sugar in the form of glycogen and store it. And you can store about a maximum of 1,500. People are a little different. If you're an athlete, if you do carb loading, you can up this number a little bit, but it is approximately 1,500. Anything more than that has to be turned into fat. And that is where the fat on your body comes from. It is not from the fat that you eat. It is storage form. Insulin is a storage hormone. Insulin stores for future use. They are reserves. Now next, to really make these points clear, I'm going to get just a little bit technical, but don't worry, it's going to be simplified and you're going to get the picture. You're going to see why I'm doing this. Carbohydrates, the basic unit of a carbohydrate is called glucose, and that is a ring. The molecule is shaped as a hexagonal, as a ring with 6 corners, and it has 6 carbons. It has a carbon molecule in each corner of that hexagon. The other version of storage is fat, and when the body stores something as fat, it doesn't store it as pure fat. It stores it at something called triglycerides. And this is not an exact conversion, but just to give you an idea that triglycerides, it has 3 fatty acids and it has a backbone of glycerol. And the glycerol is a molecule with 3 carbons. So the way you want to think about this is that a glycerol molecule is basically half of a glucose molecule. It's not an exact conversion, but the body can go through some steps where in the end it becomes essentially the same. The body doesn't store pure fat. It puts half a molecule of sugar, of carbon, that can be converted into glucose via gluconeogenesis with every triglyceride molecule. So here comes a little bit of math. Don't worry about the numbers. I believe my math is correct, and I have not accounted for if there is a 0.1% of the triglyceride that's converted differently and so forth. We're going to assume that the carbons in glycerol are worth about the same as a carbon in glucose. They're really, really close. So if you take glycerol and you take a really, really large number of those molecules called a mole, that's basically roughly a 1 with 23 zeros. It's like a billion, 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 billion or so molecules. Then those molecules of glycerol are going to weigh 92 grams. And if we burn those at 4 calories per gram, we're going to get 368 calories out of that very large number of glycerol. But for every glycerol molecule, there are 3 fatty acids. There are 3 fat molecules. And these come in varying lengths, but I try to find the answer of how long they are on average, but I couldn't find that. So a typical fatty acid molecule is 16 carbons long. So that's the number we're going to use. So if we take 3 of those fatty acids, they're going to weigh, for the same really large number of molecules, they're going to weigh 769 grams, and this is pure fat now. So the fat is converted at 9 calories per gram. So we get 6,924 calories from 1 mole of triglyceride molecules from the fat portion. So if we add this all up, 1 mole of triglycerides will give us 860, that will weigh 861 grams and give us 7,292 calories. So now we get to the cool part. Why does the body store things as fat? Why is that such a good way of storing energy? What is that survival value? Well, it can only store things as triglycerides, as fat, or as glycogen. But the glycogen also, which is pure carbohydrate at 4 calories per gram, also is going to bind water at about a 2-to-1 ratio. So every gram of glycogen is going to bind 2 grams of water. And therefore, glycogen will only give us 605 calories per pound, whereas triglycerides, the combination of fat and glycerin, will give us 3,840 calories. That means fat is 6.3 times more efficient and storing energy. And if you think 100 pounds of fat is a lot, then think about what 630 pounds of glycogen would feel like to carry around. And while we can only store about 1,500 calories of glycogen, we can store almost unlimited amounts of fat in the form of triglycerides. So someone who's very lean like myself are still going to have about 100,000 calories stored as fat or triglycerides. And someone who is extremely obese, someone who weighs 500-600 pounds, they could have upwards of 1,000,000 calories stored. So there's no limit on how much energy we can store as fat, but the glycogen runs out very, very quickly. All right, so now we're getting to the part that got me goosebumps when I was doing this research. So I wish I had a drum roll, but this is so awesome. So let's say that we're fasting and we're not adding any protein or any fat or any carbohydrate. We're doing a water fast. We can drink some tea and that usual stuff. And let's say that we are burning about 2,000 calories a day because the body still has to maintain all its regular functions. We still have to move, we still have to think and do all that stuff. We still have to repair stuff. So we're burning about 2,000 calories, but it all comes from triglycerides. And if we do that, we're burning 236 grams of body fat consisting of triglycerides in a day. That's about 0.52 pounds. So if we go back and we realize that 1 mole of triglycerides weighed 861 grams, that's almost 2 pounds. And then 1 pound of triglycerides is going to give us 48.5 grams of glycerol or glycerin that can be turned into carbohydrates. Once we do the math on that, then the fat that we're burning on a fast will give us exactly 25.3 grams of carbohydrate, of things that can turn into blood glucose for the brain, which is the exact same number that the brain needed based on the 25% glucose that it needs to run that's not supplied by ketones. So I was always wondering, where does the 75% come from? How come that the balance just happens to be that? But the body is so beautifully designed that it learned that it can use 25% glucose and 75% ketones, and it needs 25 grams of fat because it can get another 25 from the stored body fat. And then I was thinking, well, why does it store things as triglycerides? Why is it that we don't just store the fat the way it is? And again, it's so brilliant, it just fits right into all the math that we've been done. That particular molecule is the way of giving the body the 25 grams of carbs that it needs. My mind was blown. I don't know about yours. Maybe I'm a little geekier than you are. But it didn't end quite there. When we did a little more math and we figured out how many percent of the calories does the glycerol represent, well, these 368 calories compared to the fat is exactly 5%. So your body stores 5% carbohydrate, stuff that can turn into carbohydrate with the fat because it knows it's going to need it when we burn body fat. When we have no other food, it knows that's exactly the amount that it's going to need to fuel the brain. And then it occurred to me, I had seen this 5% someplace before. If you look at the keto recommendations, the macros of fat, protein, and carbohydrate that are recommended to put you in ketosis, the 5% carbohydrate that's recommended on average is exactly the same 5% that the body gets from burning pure body fat. So when you're fat adapted, that's exactly the number that the body needs. I hope that managed to blow you away just a little bit, okay? I think that stuff is so cool. So now we know that we do have to have carbohydrates. We do need glucose, but we don't need to eat it. So the limit to how long you can fast is really based on a few different things. First, how much fat do you have on the body? If you are pretty skinny, 100,000 calories of fat, then you won't last that long. I would have a really hard time going for a month or more. I would get super skinny. My body would go through some not so great changes after a month or so. But if you have 1,000,000 calories, if you have 50, 70, 80, 100 pounds of body fat, you could go months and your metabolism, this picture, these ratios, would not be stressful to you. The other factor is that you have to get enough minerals and you have to get enough fluids. So I don't recommend people going until your fat burns out. That's not necessarily the best way. I'm not saying that zero carbs is the best way for everybody. I'm not saying that you should fast as long as you can, but I want you to understand where the fuel comes from, that you're doing something that is natural to the body. And I would suggest that you get your body fat adapted through a low carb and a keto diet. Then you start with intermittent fasting. You eat fewer meals a day. You go longer between the last meal of the day and the first meal the next day. So your body gets used to it. It gets fat adapted. And then you get some good books on fasting. You learn how this works. You watch some more videos. And then you can extend the time. But it's important to know that you are safe. You will not ruin your brain. You will not run out of fuel. You're not doing something unnatural to your body. I hope you found that almost as fascinating as I did, and if you liked this video, you're gonna love that one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.